Good morning, all, on a beautiful summer day in the Northern Hemisphere in the Northeast. This is the Energy, Environment, and Sustainability webinar for June. We do these webinars monthly, and as part of our tradition from the Alumni Association, the style guide, if we're alums, we put our year of degree in our names and after our names. You'll notice that also in our the way we publish things on our website. We will be posting the website address later in the chat. The chat is not activated for our audience this morning. This is a webinar, so please, if you have questions, put them in the question and answer forum on the Zoom. And the chat, though, we will be able to send information from the panelists to you folks. This morning, we're going to start with two speakers, Annette Huber-Lee and Daphne Gondhalekar, and then we will have a question and answer period. We're very excited to be presenting a webinar on the water cycle and the food cycle and how it relates to energy and the whole issue of how they all interact and all the, sometimes I talk about co-benefits, all the co-impacts that happen as we try to devise solutions for our climate problems and to decarbonize. You may want to do better agriculture because agriculture uses a huge amount of the fresh water that's available to humans. You may want to do more hydroelectric, but that takes water away from other uses. So it's a very interesting topic, and our academics and our friends in Europe have looked a little bit at what is called the nexus of how to do this in a combined way. It kind of grows out of the international emphasis on sustainable development goals, because the rest of the world is very concerned about 17 different aspects of how we're going to have a sustainable future. So it isn't always what people think of as climate and political talk, but it will be very interesting. So at this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to Ramon, who's the Associate Director for Webinars at EESN. And Ramon will introduce our speakers and we'll be off and running. Ramon.
Good morning. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to our speakers and to the audience that comes in, because that's why we do this. This is a great topic. It's not a new topic, but I think it's getting increasing visibility and urgency because of the changing climate, also in a world of rising population and standards of living and so on. So we're going to start with Annette Huber-Lee who is a master's in civil engineering at MIT from 1987. I'll mention the rest of her degrees later. She's a senior scientist at the Stockholm Environment Institute, the US branch, where she has worked for over 20 years, tackling the challenges of planning and managing environmental water resources in a sustainable manner, both in international and regional forums, domestic ones. The work is based on integrating economic, engineering, ecological, and social approaches, models, and tools. From 01 to 06, Annette directed the water program at the SEI US branch in Massachusetts, office in Massachusetts. And years later, she was the SEI Asia branch director in Bangkok for a while. She's also served as research assistant and professor and lecturer at the Department of Civil Engineering, Civil and Environmental Engineering at Tufts University. And from 06 to 08, Annette served as science and theme leader for the Challenge Program on Water and Food at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. She also holds a PhD in engineering sciences from Harvard University and a bachelor's in agricultural engineering from Cornell University. She will be the first speaker. Then she will be followed immediately after that by Daphne Gondhalekar, who was a postdoc associate at the MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning, DUSP, back in 07-08. Daphne researches and teaches about urban water, energy, food nexus, precisely our topic, at Munich, at the chair of Urban Water Systems Engineering of the Technical University of Munich, TUM. Before that, at the TUN Center for Urban Ecology and Climate Adaptation. She's also a consultant on integrated urban planning and participates in the UN's Habitat Planners for Climate Action. Before TUM, she was a senior researcher at the Center for Developmental Research at the University of Bonn. Daphne studied architecture at the University of Glasgow in Scotland and holds an MS, a master's degree in architecture and urban design from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. Later, a PhD in urban planning and ecosystems from University of Tokyo. Daphne is active in the MIT Club of Germany, and in particular, its Smart Circular City Startup Program. So very busy folks, and we're delighted to start with Annette, and please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah and Ramon, for this opportunity to talk about the Water, Energy, Food Nexus. I'm hoping Sarah can, or Ramon, you can pull up slides. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've done, actually my background's a lot in water, but what I'm finding through my work is the need to really look across sectors. And I hope I can motivate that for you today. I realize some in the audience may be water, energy, food nexus experts, and I welcome your input. But I hope also for those of you who might be new to it that I do my best to make it clear of what I'm doing.
I'll have that up again in 1 second while my screen clears.
Okay, then no problem. I can tell you, I mean, what I'd like to do is start with motivation for the Nexus. So tell you about a project that I'm just really sort of winding down right now in Rwanda that started out as a water project. I would say half of my work actually just comes from the pure water sector, but it increasingly evolves into the need to look at other sectors. So I'd like to focus on this project in Rwanda and then conclude with some really interesting technical challenges that we face when we try to actually do integrated water, energy, food nexus modeling.
Let's try this once more here.
Okay, otherwise maybe we ask Ramon to take over. A little background on the Rwanda project. It's funded by the World Bank, the Water Resources Group 2030. It was at the request of the Rwanda Water Board. And we were requested to do a hydroeconomic analysis for the country and look in particular at this visionary plan that Rwanda has for 2050. I think one of the things that we did that was quite innovative, the Water Resources Group 2030 has done a series of these hydroeconomic analyses. Typically, they had been done using kind of a strict, perfect, this is the slide.
Except we're missing the end of
Cut
it.
off a little bit, but I think it could work.
I'm sorry, but yes.
So instead of doing sort of cost benefit in a very simplistic way and kind of ranking a list of 100 projects, we decided to integrate a water model with a macroeconomic model to try to look at how water plays a role in the overall macroeconomy of Rwanda. So we did sort of what would be a classic water model for Rwanda. You can see the level of disaggregation of Rwanda on the right-hand side of your screen. We did a hydrologic model that we calibrated, validated, and I could talk a lot about sort of a classic sort of disaggregation of what are the various demands on that water from domestic, agriculture, industry, hydropower, and then ecological flows, which are critical from even just from the perspective of tourism for Rwanda. If we go to the next slide, this was paired then with a macroeconomic model. This is one of the innovations I think that we brought to this project, where we, instead of, you could think of the lower right-hand quarter would be what was typically done and just looking at the water sector in isolation from the wider economy and direct impacts water has on the economy. And instead expanding that out to see how does that play out in other sectors? So think about, agricultural post-processing, transport, the labor involved in that, And then the inputs required for agriculture in terms of fertilizer, pesticides, other inputs, and energy are also connections here. And the water-related variability comes in, and depending on how water plays out in the economy, it can amplify, dampen, and transform those impacts on GDP. So what we're ultimately looking at is how do decisions around water play out in a country's GDP, in this case, Rwanda. Just very briefly, what we looked at in this was a combination of, if you go to the next slide, 3 scenarios. So what continues under the baseline or business as usual, do nothing or very little. What if you went with this Vision 2050, which is massive, expansive, and irrigated area as a key part of this transformation to a middle income or upper middle income country? And then we looked at something focused on water resilience. On the right-hand side is giving an illustration of the climate projections that we looked at. We looked at more than 120 different climate projections. On the y-axis is the change, sort of average change in temperature for a particular climate projection over the time period of 2040 to 2050. Relative to historical, so the intersecting axes are historical temperature and historical precipitation. So the dots, all the dots are showing warmer temperatures on average, as we expect. And what we see in terms of precipitation is some are showing lower average annual rainfall, and the majority are showing more rainfall, but these this is not probabilistic. If we go to the next slide, I just wanted to give a sense of how dramatically the plan is to increase irrigated agriculture. So this is a representation of average annual demands over time. With business as usual, there's a gradual expansion of irrigated area, nothing dramatic, but under Vision 2050, there's just a dramatic increase in irrigated agriculture. With the water resilience scenario, there's still an expansion of irrigated area, but it's done in a so-called climate smart way, so a less water intensive approach. So some of the key findings, really the major headline out of this is that under the baseline, GDP basically fluctuates with rainfall. So if we go to the next slide as kind of an illustration of this, if we looked at 4 of the climate projections, sort of historical, and 3 of the climate projections, sort of like hot and wet and dry, you can see, especially in the initial decade or so, how much GDP fluctuates based on rainfall. This is not something new. It might be new to you, but there's prior research done that has, particularly in focus on Africa, that shows, particularly for low income countries, because they're so agriculturally dependent, that GDP tends to fluctuate with annual rainfall. I think the really new insight that we offer in our work is showing that part of that fluctuation in the case of Rwanda is a reflection of the energy dependence on water, that 70% of the energy used in Rwanda is run-of-river, it's primarily run-of-river hydro, and this deeply intertwined. So this particular slide is just trying to show the fluctuation that corresponds with rainfall. Even in wet climates, there's still fluctuation. It's less of a fluctuation, but there's fluctuation with rainfall and GDP. And the next slide is showing the attribution of that fluctuation is in large part, especially initially in the first decade or so, is in large part due to hydropower as opposed to agriculture. At the next slide, after this, I'm trying to remember. I'm going to remember everything. Oh, it's just to illustrate that we did do some cost benefit, but we did it in a very different way. Instead of looking at the role of storage individually as a project by project, but to look at how storage played out across the entire economy. And storage is by far, almost at any discount rate, is advantageous. I mean, just storage is a major factor for, or a way of addressing this fluctuation that's happening in the GDP. However, that storage does not, has not been factored in energy planning in Rwanda. So there's been, in a completely separate track, an energy study was done that only looked at 4 climate projections, all of which showed a wetter climate, used average values, did not factor in that this massive expansion in irrigation would require storage, and made this strong recommendation to expand run-of-river hydro, which would exacerbate the problem with GDP fluctuating with rainfall. So it really highlighted to me and to the country of Rwanda the need for this cross-sectoral conversation to happen. If you want to expand irrigated agriculture, it's going to require storage, which will have implications on run-of-river hydro. In addition, I think there's typically in the energy sector, in just my personal experience, I can't say this from having examined a vast amount of literature, just in my direct experience, has given little consideration to streamflow impacts and climate change on hydropower, in particular run-of-river hydropower. So for me, this project really motivated the need for the sectors to look across one another and find ways to work together. Easily said. Also, most of my work, I mean, half of my work now is applied water, energy, food nexus work, and there are both technical challenges and sort of political, social governance challenges. From a technical modeling standpoint, it's the challenges of working at different time slices and time scales, different geographic scales. And an additional complexity is, or difficulty, I would say, is how to convey these complex results to non-technical stakeholders. As challenging as that is, much more challenging are the political governance and social challenges around getting cooperation across sectors, getting coherence between policies, who are often, that are often really directly, not compatible, and really the power dynamics between these ministries is extremely challenging. Often in the work that I do, the ministries of energy have quite some power, where the ministries of environment, agriculture, and water have much less power in order to be able to influence the decision making, and it's challenging to bring these different players to the table. So I hope this was interesting and insightful, and I'm really excited to hear what Daphne has to say, which I think is a really nice complement to my presentation. So thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I'd also like to apologize for us messing up these slides. They will be available afterwards. It's different programs, as you know, this wonderful tech age, we can do it all, but we weren't able to put that through directly. Thank you folks for putting up with this. But Ramon, please continue, and we will have it available correctly in the future. It'll be a couple of months. Well, it'll be a little while before we post it, but back on that event description page that you folks used to see what this was about, which I actually did post in the chat. It will be linked there in clean format. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification, and thank you, Annette. And now, Daphne, we're looking forward to your perspective, both national and international, on the topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Annette, for that super interesting talk. And thank you, Ramon, for handing me the word. So today I would like to give a little bit of insight into our projects that we're doing at the Technical University of Munich on the Nexus topic, and looking forward to the discussion after that. So I'm an urban planner by training, so I look at cities mainly, and my special area of interest is wastewater, although my boss hates it when I say wastewater. So we call it water reclamation, with resource recovery as a key to net zero carbon urban development. So just to recap on what the Nexus approach is about, briefly, basically the concept was coined by Professor Hoff of SEI about a decade ago. And it basically says that taking a cross-sectoral approach can help us to conserve natural resources, particularly water and energy. And it takes water, energy, and food sectors as its starting point, as being at the basis of our economy, really, and argues that water and energy are very closely linked. For example, we need a lot of water to produce energy, but we also need a lot of energy to supply water, to collect wastewater, not wastewater, but to collect water, to treat water, and we need a lot of water and energy to grow food, and so on. So those three sectors are very closely linked. So there's a lot of potential there to plan them in conjunction. And obviously, when we think about doing that, to pick up on what Annette was saying, this cannot be done without governance supporting this very complex process. It's not a technical, it's very clear to understand that it's not really a technical issue by itself. Of course, it has technical components, but the governance and responsible governance is key to implementing a Nexus approach. And of course, this integrated approach can also help us to implement the SDGs that also are integrated in nature. But if we look at the academic literature and at the Nexus approach in practice, even though it's been around under this label for the last decade, we see that there are very rare instances when the Nexus approach has been implemented in an explicit manner at the city level. So there are some cities like Rajkot in India or Växjö in Sweden that have a Nexus approach, but most cities are still not taking such an integrated approach, and they prefer, they still commonly plan in silos or within sectors. So basically, our thinking is that in order to convince convince people of the benefits of taking a Nexus approach, more pilot projects are needed in order to be able to test how it would actually work in practice. So that's what we try and do at TUM. So we have a research initiative called Nexus at TUM. It's a research lab that brings together all of the research projects and researchers that are working in the Nexus area at the Technical University of Munich in 5 or 6 different schools. And we range all across from natural scientists to social scientists. And the research focus is to take cities as our starting point, as key greenhouse gas emitters, and to look at what the key opportunities are to lower those greenhouse gas emissions in cities by taking an integrated or Nexus approach. So we try and visualize alternative development pathways by looking at cross-sectoral synergy potentials, is what I call them, Nexus synergy potentials. And we take water, energy, and food as the base sectors, but we link it also to solid waste and transportation particularly, as well as some other sectors like ecosystem services or health as the key underlying sectors. And we also try and look at synergy opportunities between climate change mitigation and adaptation measures and strategies, because we assume that cities generally have limited capacities. So we need solutions that can, for want of a better allegory, kill several birds with one stone. It's a terrible one. Have to think of a better one. So that's what we do. And we have case study cities and partners in India, and Ghana, Niger, and in Germany predominantly. In our research group, we have about 25 master level students working on their thesis work on various Nexus topics. We also have 2 doctoral students, and I'm also the academic coordinator of the Water, Energy, Food Nexus area of specialization in environmental engineering. So TUM has this master program, and as far as we know, it's one of the few universities that has a dedicated curriculum on the Nexus topic worldwide. So if you want to know more about this initiative, here's our link to the website. So, So the question is really, how can we deploy the Nexus approach in order to close loops of resources in cities? So we can, for example, imagine that there's a lot of water coming into cities for various uses, and there's a lot of energy coming in, but under our regular urban planning or processes that we have, this water just gets used once and gets ejected from the city to be treated and then recovered from the natural environment. So there are very good opportunities to recycle water at this urban scale. So there are various water reuse opportunities that we can think of. We can recycle water endless amounts of times if we use the right technology, and we could recycle it, for example, for drinking water, but also to flush toilets or to recharge groundwater or to wash cars. So there are many opportunities also for energy recovery, nutrient recovery. How can we operationalize this? And we can imagine that that has a whole host of technical, economic, ecological, and governance issues that need to be addressed. We also need to address our basic value system to a certain degree, because at the moment, even when we look at the current news, like the war in the Ukraine, we can see that most of the research and policy focus continues to be how to continue to supply a very high level of natural resources from outside or from far away, rather than curbing demand or rather than recycling resources on site. So why is water reclamation such a big potential? Basically, water or lack of adequate treatment of water and collection of this wastewater is a huge health issue in many countries all over the world. We've all seen images of cities in India where wastewater, for example, is not properly managed. And we know from these statistics by the Food and Agriculture Organization that worldwide, very little water that's actually collected and treated is reused directly or intentionally. So worldwide, it's only 12%. And some countries like Germany reuse less than 1% of the water. So there's a huge opportunity here to reuse that water as an alternative source of water, particularly in countries where water scarcity is increasing with climate change, and to regain valuable products from that water stream that at the moment we're not recovering. So next to water, being able to recover water, we can recover energy from this wastewater or nutrients or various other substances, including bioplastics or phosphorus, metals, even antibiotics. And particularly decentralized systems may be a way to enable us to recover those resources more efficiently. And there's a big opportunity in this as well, if we look at the way that we manage wastewater at the moment. I keep saying wastewater, I'm going to put my parentheses here, because the centralized sewage systems that are commonly in place in cities worldwide have now reached a certain age. In Munich, it's 100 years or more, that the age of the system. So they're actually facing a state of disrepair because these systems are disintegrating and cities are having to invest a huge amount of funding in order to keep these systems up and running. So in the USA, for example, the cost estimate of for keeping the water supply and wastewater management system as it is estimated to be $1 trillion over 25 years, which is a pretty large sum. So this is a problem, of course, but it's also an opportunity to reconsider whether these systems are really appropriate still under climate change conditions, or whether we need something like a paradigm shift, not only in how we view water, but also how we handle it in using our infrastructures. So for example, if we think about the fact that in Munich, we use 130 liters per person per day, but a third of that is used just to flush the toilet and it's drinking water, the question is really, is that still appropriate in this day and age? So this is one of our case studies, the small town of Leh in India, where the tourism economy has grown very rapidly in recent decades. And because Leh is in a semi-arid area in the Himalayas, it's easy to see what happens when there is a huge increase in water demand without a lot of water being available. What happened in Leh was that private hotels and guest houses started abstracting huge amounts of water, drinking water, locally, depleting the local aquifer, and then produced a lot of this wastewater on site, which in turn ended up polluting the groundwater which people were drinking from. And this is, again, an opportunity for us to think about other options than implementing a centralized sewage system in this place in order to deal with this accruing wastewater. So what we've been recommending for almost the last decade in Leh is that a decentralized system could be one way of recycling water locally on site. So there are agricultural areas that are suffering from shortage of water that could be kept running with this recycled water. It's also a means of recovering energy. These smaller systems could be run by renewable energies, and it could even be used to recharge the local aquifer locally. So it has a lot of potential co-benefits. So what we do in my team is that we try and create what I call numeric or real evidence for what these co-benefits could really look like. So in this case, we said, well, the decentralized system could have an alternative technology option. We chose constructed wetland technology because that's something that works in high altitude, very low temperature in the winter areas. And we found that we can use the system very effectively to treat water to a standard which is suitable for agricultural irrigation. So we tried to show how many of these hotels and guest houses we would have to connect together in order to get enough water in a constructed wetland in order to be able to irrigate this amount of area, which you see in pink. And then we said, well, if we plant cabbages on it, this is how many tons of cabbages we can get. Or if we recover this energy from this water, we can cook for 30 to 40 people per day with the methane that can be recovered, or we can recover 12 tons of organic fertilizer every year. So it doesn't sound like a lot to start with, but it's evidence of what the system could bring. And we can start weighing the investment costs against the benefits and trying to figure out whether this would be doable in the society there. We also showed that implementing this alternative system would save greenhouse gas emissions in the construction of the system itself, as well as during operation and maintenance compared to a centralized sewage system. And we also do similar studies on the city of Munich, where we try to show that if the city needs to spend so and so much funding in the next few decades in order to keep the centralized sewage system up and running the way it is, what an alternative system could potentially bring us. So again, we said, well, what if we just harvest, for example, all the rainwater, and we use that to flush toilets? We could actually cover 30% of the water demand and save on energy that's used for pumping regularly. We could cover 20% of local household electricity demand if we recover energy from this wastewater at the block level in downtown Munich, where I live. Or we could free up some area that's now covered in parking lots and could potentially provide a substantial amount of the daily fruit and vegetable supply of the local population, which again has energy implications, food security implications, and also social implications, because in a city like Munich, where the living costs are very high, a lot of students or older residents are having trouble being able to afford organic fruit and vegetable, for example. So in all of this, we can see an opportunity for cities to start rethinking whether the urban infrastructure systems that we have and the paradigms that that were used in order to create these systems are still the best options for us, or whether it's an opportunity to think about something else. And in the case of Munich, we even tried to do a cost-benefit analysis with the help of some economists to show that a decentralized system using an anaerobic membrane bioreactor could be cost recuperated within about 2 years. As climate change proceeds, the topic of water reuse is becoming very interesting in Europe generally, in Germany in particular. So there's a part of the north of Bavaria, which is already facing local drought conditions. So we have a project there as well, where we are recycling water at the city scale, which is used for agricultural irrigation of green space. So we can also see that when the pressure, the socioeconomic pressure is high enough and the climate pressure becomes high enough, there is actually a lot of readiness to act and also to think about very innovative systems and how to implement them in an innovative way. But again, the participatory process is absolutely essential to get everyone on board and to make these solutions sustainable. So I think I already mentioned most of my conclusions. I can see Ramon, which means I should stop speaking. But just to sum up, the whole situation that we're in this decade is so exciting because it really is offering us a lot of opportunities to reimagine cities and to find ways to lower greenhouse gas emissions. So very much looking forward to having a discussion with you about that.
Thank you, Daphne. I think the two presentations drive home the clear message of, these are complex, very complex challenges, which is why they need to be looked at together. Otherwise, we're just the cost and the efforts will be unsurmountable. But I think it also points to the opportunities, and I think that's what I hope we can take away a little bit from the discussion, even if we don't understand all the details. So thank you again. Let's see.
May I start with a question, or did you have one, Raymond?
No, you start, and I'll have one, and then we'll open.
It was interesting that Annette was talking about how storage for water was part of a very important concept. It seems to me that not only in dry situations, but also in flooding situations, that storage for water is very important. So if you two had some comments on sort of overarching principles about how we treat water. I mean, one of the things that happens is that the scale of constructed wetlands becomes fairly large for a city. So sometimes engineered solutions become what's preferred by engineers anyway. Please, some comments on how much does storage is it important, and how much can be done as a reconstructed ecosystem, and how much do you think needs to be done engineering wise?
Let's start and then hand to you, Daphne. Those are sort of complex questions, right? I mean, storage is an incredible strategy, but comes with trade-offs, right? Particularly when you think about changing flow regimes and ecosystem impacts. So I wish that there was an easy answer to that question, but it really, it requires quite some examination about the trade-offs between the level of storage and how that plays out for ecosystems and livelihoods as well, right? And I think maybe the second part of your question really is for Daphne.
Okay, well, thank you for that question. And on the first part, I think it is really complex, but we need to get creative. And you know that I studied architecture first, so I tend to take the architectural approach. So thinking about water storage in Munich, for example, we realized that the amount of rain that's going to fall is going to stay roughly the same over the year. It's just shifting more towards the winter, but we need it in the summer. So the question is how to store it in the winter to be able to use it in the summer. And we just looked at what are the storage options that we have. And we took some GIS data that the city provided us, and we measured the volume of all the underground parking. And we hypothesized that at some point we're going to have to cut down on cars. So we got rid of the cars, hypothetically speaking. And we realized that if we can use all the underground parking to store water, in theory, it's enough water to meet our demand in the summer. I mean, of course, that's not going to work just like that, but it's good to know that we have structures in place, because we know that building new structures is also very greenhouse gas intensive. And we need to get creative and think about decentralized solutions. So we know that the city of Rajkot, for example, they managed to bring up the groundwater level, which was seriously depleted, back to very sustainable levels by mandating each household to do groundwater recharge. So rainwater harvesting linked to groundwater recharge. So a lot of little actions can also end up to a big whole. And the same is true, I think, also of the constructed wetland approach. We need to get creative. So we could think about making them vertical or linking them to facades or putting them on roofs. They could also be decentralized. We just need to get a little bit crazy, which is what I encourage our students to do, and try to imagine the way the cities could change.
Thank you. Ramon, or we could, DAG, whoever you are, we
Yeah,
can,
let's just take
we
a
can
couple
allow
of
you to
questions.
talk. Why don't you, let me
Yeah,
just,
so,
put this. Oops.
oh, okay.
DAG.
Sure. So how much storage per capita?
And who are you, sir?
True Chillet,
True.
75, 73, BSAD, CE.
Great, thank you.
I could give an answer, and then Daphne. I mean, it's nice because I think we work at different scales, and I'm sorry, I can't give you. I mean, it really depends on, are you in an arid environment, a tropical environment? What is the water being used for? So there's not an easy answer. I won't pick one. I'm sorry, I just won't, because in a way it feeds into exactly what what are the decisions we're making about alternative ways of addressing. I think, as an engineer, as I was trained, there's a certain demand and you meet it with a certain supply. And we recognize more and more that's overly simplistic, that
Marvin Manmine did not teach me that in transportation. He said, listen to the customer, basically. Our job is simply to tell them what the results will be of whatever their decisions or options might be. So
yeah.
it's not that. Even though I'm old, I'm of that younger generation. That all changed back in 1970. But the question remains, I mean, I love the underground parking idea, but those underground parking spaces on Beacon Hill are going from what, 50 grand to 100 grand each?
Oh, no, in Boston, they have a scheme to use some of the natural waterways for storage. It's really excellent. You'll have to keep an eye on the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. And everywhere that there are natural basins, it can really be wonderful, especially in coastal regions where you have tides and those storm extremes. Thank you, Doug, DAG, whoever you are. Go ahead.
Yeah, we also have a question from Andy. I don't know if it's Saleh or Zale. It says, please consider changing the priorities to energy, water, food, since energy is the source of water distribution, wastewater processing, and food processing, and agriculture. Any comments? I think it's about shifting focuses, but foci, or however you pronounce it. But they're all interconnected. But I like to hear what you feel in terms of drivers, priorities.
Yeah, it's there's so many acronyms for the nexus here, and some start with land, and some start with water, and some start with energy. I think it's it's all how we frame our understanding of the world. I'm more than happy to start with energy. Maybe it would bring the energy people to the table when we're talking about the nexus. It's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Maybe if I can add to that one. So actually, I always say water, energy, and food are three sides of the same coin. The only reason we put them in that order is because that's the only acronym that people can easily pronounce. Like, that's why we picked that order, and that was also the original order under which that concept was coined. So that's the most well-known order, let's say. But yeah, we give energy equal priority, definitely.
Very, very good. Lorena, I'm going to open you for your question, if you would care to
Of
ask
course.
us.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. So my question is, where does the funding come from your projects? Is it from the government or academia or the private sector? And also, if you could tell us more about how do you manage those projects? because they tend to be multidisciplinary, right? So how do you take accountability from the different sectors? How do you measure success?
Do you want to go first, Daphne?
Sorry, I just had to, someone came in the door and I had to give instructions to my daughter. So would you mind repeating that? I'm really sorry.
No problem. My question was that where does the funding come from your projects? Is it from the government or academia or a hybrid, or how do you manage these projects? How do you have accountability from the different sectors, and how do you measure success?
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question. So these are research projects. We don't implement any actual projects so far. So we're not actually accountable in the sense of building urban infrastructure and then talking to different sectors. We're trying to facilitate a stakeholder process in order to kind of pave the way for potential projects, let's say. But in the first line, we're funded, we have been funded in the past by the European Commission, for example, the German Research Foundation, and also the German government to produce new knowledge in the first line on the Nexus approach.
Okay, thank you.
We had a hand up from Carol Steiner. Is that question still pending? Maybe not. Oh,
It looks like she posted.
I see. I'll just read it out. I've read that in Israel, there is a successful use of, quote, wastewater in agriculture, such that the loop connecting food and water and wastewater is relatively
closed. Can you hear me now?
yes,
can you hear
we
me
do.
now? Awesome. Okay, that it's relatively closed, such that the source of water that is, I guess, used for humans to drink and or that comes from the north to the south is used for agriculture, and then humans eat the crops, and then there is human waste which goes back into the water purification system and back for agricultural use, and then that closes the loop. But I don't know that there is any energy component to this. But can you, one of you or all of you, speak to how this model can perhaps be extended to areas where energy should be part of this nexus, this loop, and also whether, from what you know of this, if this is only feasible in a smaller geographical area?
I've worked in Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, and I could speak to it a little bit, maybe first, and then Daphne maybe could jump in. You know, Israel's kind of extraordinary in its reuse of wastewater. Your boss should forgive me for that terminology, Daphne. Something on the order of 70 or 80%, and it definitely is energy intensive because some of the source of that water is actually desalinated water. So they're desalinating water that then gets reused, which takes, you know, significant amount of treatment. On the flip side of that is it makes them quite drought resistant because the water, you know, we tend to use our water sort of independently if it's available of climate. And so you have this relatively steady source of water independent of rainfall that's reliably available for agriculture. And they've set up pricing structures to incentivize farmers to further to use that recycled water. And it's a model that we're sort of seeing increasingly used in the context of Palestine and Jordan. There's still quite some political and even, I'd say, psychological resistance to the idea of buying agricultural products that have been treated with recycled wastewater, even if that's treated to a degree that's drinkable. Even in our own country here in the US, I've done some work with the US Department of Energy funding, looking at the water energy nexus in Southwest US, which we know is under extreme drought right now, and there's still resistance to wastewater reuse. It's just astonishing, a real lost opportunity. And I think, Daphne, you were really making that point quite clearly. that there's so much opportunity around wastewater reuse that is underutilized. I don't know, Daphne, if you would like to add to that.
Yes, thank you, Annette. I think you summed it up very well. Already, there's not much to add at all. I think really, I mean, Israel is such a good example, but again, it's a question of where the pressure is high. So the water stress is very high already, but it's met with a high amount of capacity to be able to do something about it, let's say, in a relatively high-tech way, and also the funding availability to provide the energy to do that. So this reverse osmosis, for example, that's needed in order to recover saline water and use it for irrigation, that's extremely energy intensive. And some countries just not able to provide the energy to do that. So one big issue why wastewater treatment in India is not very successful is not because decentralized systems can't potentially work there. It's because, and I keep talking about India because I'm half Indian, just in case you're wondering, I'm not picking on India. There are plenty of other countries that have the same issues. But the trouble is that the power supply isn't stable. So then these wastewater treatment plants can't function properly. And we're very much interested in the potential of recovering that energy from wastewater. So one big thing that we look at is capturing methane from wastewater, because that's such a potent greenhouse gas, and particularly through digesting it anaerobically together with organic waste, which also emits a lot of methane, seems to be a huge opportunity.
That was my business professionally, was turning landfill gas into energy. But the questions came up similarly. Susan Murcott has a question about the toxicity. In America, even using landfill gas, like at an ice cream plant as their part of their power plant, people didn't like the fact that the energy was coming from a landfill, which is pretty remote and very distinct. But Susan, you have a question, please.
Yes, my
proceed.
question is to Daphne, and it is the issue of toxic chemicals in wastewater. And by the way, I am a wastewater engineer, water and wastewater engineer. I've been distressed by the recent discoveries of PFAS in wastewater in the state of Maine that has been agriculturally applied to organic farms. And I'm concerned about the much greater number of toxic chemicals abroad, and how decentralized systems can address that. And I'm a big fan of decentralized systems.
Well, that's a great question, but I'm not a water engineer, so I'm not sure if I can give a very good answer, but I'm aware of these PFAS as well. And my boss, Professor Jörg Dreves, is an expert on PFAS as well. He's been going back and forth, especially to the US, trying to advise on this particular issue. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, at the moment, that's a problem that we don't know how to solve. But again, it's really a question of the stress, the water stress that's in place, I would say. In one of our case studies in Niger, for example, it's a question of surviving from one year to the next without having access to any water, regardless of what's in the water. So, I mean, even decentralized systems can be high tech as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that they would be nature-based solutions or something. Maybe we can, what we often say is that we may need a hybrid system where we, for example, treat our waste, our water that we want to drink in a different way than to the water that we may use for agriculture or for toilet flushing or something. And that if we use water with PFAS in it, for example, to flush toilets, that may not be so bad. So there are opportunities to try and separate our different water demands and the water qualities, and thereby hopefully being able to make them more appropriate to the drinking water standards or the water reuse standards that we have, and make it safe. I don't know if that was a very good answer, but
no, we have time for one more. Nikhil Nadkari has a question. Why don't you just say it instead of me reading it off, Nikhil? Are you on? Can you unmute yourself, or do I need to do that? Once again, my expertise on this
No,
is
I have
not,
to unmute myself.
there you go.
There you go.
Wait a minute. Now can you hear me or?
Yes, we
Yes,
can. And
we
you're
can.
you're not Nikhil Nadkari, are you? Go ahead.
No, I'm Nikhil Desai. I haven't been part of this ever before.
Fine.
But
Go ahead,
Welcome.
please.
I have been frustrated with the urban planning academics in India with passions of sustainability that have been going on for 40 years and amounting to practically nothing in practice. So I'm questioning this all talk about integrated approach when actually the laws and procedures of urban planning and all the interagencies, I mean, all the agencies that actually exist have not yet done enough to satisfy the desires of the academics of integrated approach.
That's a very good question, and we have only a couple of minutes left, but Daphne, I guess that's yours to answer.
Well, yeah, that's a big frustration for me as well. And all I can offer by way of answer is that it's difficult to do. And a lot of cities seem to be involved in firefighting, so they just don't have capacity to take an integrated approach. So that's why we're trying to create this evidence and try and put price tags on our evidence to kind of show how the integrated approach could really be useful for cities, so that then they can say, well, if we want to lower our greenhouse gas emissions by 10%, then we can do this, this, and this. But that kind of evidence is still rare. So I think we need to come from both sides. Like us academics, we have to get more out of our comfort zone and approach these cities and ask what kind of solutions they need in order to be able to generate the evidence that will help them to be able to get into gear.
Very good.
I was just going to add, Nikhil, that your frustration is very grounded, because that's true not only in many other parts of the world, but it's true here as well. And I think the only solution is to remember that dealing with these things in isolation is hard, but they become even harder if they're not dealt in an integrated fashion. So it's a long-term task, but I don't see that we have any alternative. It's the same thing with climate mitigation, greenhouse gas mitigations and then adaptation. It's expensive, it's challenging, and except for one thing, the alternative of not doing anything is much, much worse and much more expensive. So I think this is why a lot of folks have been using more the terminology that this is not just a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary problem that needs to be tackled that way, but it's a transdisciplinary, meaning go beyond the disciplines. And you referred, Annette, earlier, that a lot of the obstacles really are institutional, social, economic, political, and so on. And I think many of us come from technical backgrounds and think if we have good models and good solutions, let's just do it. But the real world, a lot of the barriers are, and they're grounded in people's reality. So stakeholder, getting people on the ground to understand these things so that they can put pressure on their other folks. So
a true nexus, much bigger, many
Nexus
more
plus.
synergies. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. Again, the MIT Alumni Environment, Energy, and Sustainability Network is a group of groups within the MIT community, whether it's an MIT club or an affinity club. And our goal is to connect these people and share our professional expertise and make sure that we know what kind of work our alums are doing out in all of these areas, because we do want a future that our kids can enjoy and an earth that is livable. So our next monthly meeting will not be in July. It'll be in August on the 11th at 7 p.m. Central Time, I believe. And we have someone speaking about small wind power, that it really is feasible, although when they say small, it's on a fairly big piece of land, a 60-foot tower still. But there are machines out there that can do wind that way. And wind and solar do work together. Maybe that's the kind of energy we need for getting this water to move around and be shared. So I want to thank Daphne and Annette and Ramon and all of you for participating. And hopefully we'll see you again, or go to our website, which I haven't put in the chat yet, but if you eesn.alumgroup.mit.edu, and we post lots of information there and resources. Not so much the stuff that's going on at MIT, but the things that alumni are doing. So thank
And
you.
they're doing it all over the world. So we do this so that we can hear from you as well, as much as providing you information that may be of interest and so on. So thank you for attending, because if you don't attend, we're not doing a good job. And thank you for Annette, and to Annette and Daphne for bringing your insights and your experience, and hopefully stimulate broader thinking on these topics.
Thank you.
Thank you for this great opportunity and the great discussion.
Yeah. Bye.
All right, I'm going to close out now.